Welcome again to brandylibrary.tv for our ambassador series, and today, well, he actually owns it, and this is David Cuttino, Cuttino, and Reservoir. Well, I'm saying it with a French accent. I shouldn't.
Well, it actually is originally French.
How do you say it?
Cuttino, but that's a South Carolina accent because the French name is Cuttino, and we immigrated over to Charleston in the 1600s, and it became Cuttino because it was shortened.
But it's about whiskey, so let's get back. And not just whiskey, we've got a bourbon here in that small bottle. Can you tell us a bit about what's inside, what's around, what's behind?
Well, what we started out to do is first and foremost make a quality whiskey. And being from Virginia, my partner and I kind of grew up around bourbon. It's kind of a state drink. And unfortunately, even though distilleries, the first distillery in the country, is believed to be on the James River in Virginia, there really isn't that much whiskey making going on in Virginia now. You still have Virginia Gentlemen, and a lot of people have won bar bets with that because they think bourbon only comes from Kentucky. But Virginia Gentlemen has been made in Virginia for a very long time. So we decided to go ahead and set out and create a bourbon. And the way we did this was go ahead and offer another distillery our services for free and learn the functional reality of actually operating a distillery and how to make it.
Mm-hmm.
So we did that and took the knowledge that we developed and went down to Virginia and set up our own distillery and set about sourcing grain and all the ingredients local to Virginia and basically making a product from start to finish in-house at a distillery in Virginia and try to bring the art of whiskey making back there. And what we have here is 100% corn bourbon. And it's handmade in the pot still. We do all the grinding ourselves. We ferment in-house, and then we distill it twice, barrel it, and go ahead and taste it throughout the process. And when it's ready to be bottled, go ahead and we bottle it up all by hand and wax it ourselves, and then distribute it mainly in Virginia, but we are trying to reach out and get a bigger audience and get it into the fine hands of Brandy Library.
Well, but then let's go a few steps backward now. Why?
Why?
You're more in finance than in whiskey to start with. Maybe you had a taste for whiskey. What decided you on just learning whiskey and then?
Well, it's an interesting story. I touched on that we grew up around bourbon in Virginia. There's a lot of bootlegging that goes on down there, so we're fairly familiar with the process. But when I was in New York City, I left my finance job, and my children were hitting kindergarten age, and we decided to move them back down to Virginia, and there really isn't a lot of bond trading going on in Richmond. So we figured, well, what are we going to do down there? And at the time, the Mount Vernon distillery had just recently been rebuilt, and I saw that and said, wow, this looks like something that we could do just for fun, as a hobby. So I talked to a couple of my friends who do historical renovations and said, why don't we do this? And as it turned out, at the time, the Belmont distillery was up for sale, or at least it still was there. So we saw kind of what the cost of getting into the business was, and said, wow, this might make a little sense. And we kind of dug a little bit more into the process and what needed to be done. We said, we might be able to actually make a little business out of this.
Mm-hmm.
We said, what's the best way to do it? We said, well, we really need to go and work somewhere and learn the art of it, like how to really make good whiskey. And so that's what we did.
All right. Well, sounds like a good idea that became a reality.
It did become a reality. It took some time.
When was the very beginning of this? Was it 10 years ago? Was it 5 years ago?
No, actually, it's a very short time period, and most people are very surprised at how short it was. I think we were pretty smart about the way that we went about it, but it started at the end of 2008.
All right, so it is still quite recent, then already a success, I guess.
Yeah, we've actually had a lot of very good early success with it, having a tough time meeting retail demand in Virginia, and had a great response. But the way that we were able to get this stuff to market so quickly is by using smaller barrels.
Smaller barrels translated into smaller bottles too.
Yes, of course. smaller barrels give birth to smaller barrels.
Now, what are we talking about? 10 gallon, 15 gallon?
Well, the secret, and it's well known in the distilling industry about small barrels and a little less known in public circles, is that what really gives the bourbon its color and flavor is the volume of alcohol to the wood surface area ratio. So if you just take, say, a 55-gallon barrel, which is kind of the industry standard, and you shrink it down, you change that ratio, so you can actually speed up the aging process. Mm-hmm. Now, this isn't something that you can just go out and do. It does take a little bit of work. It's a little bit of an art. I was lucky enough to work with some guys that had actually mastered doing that prior. And so we had a leg up with knowing how to use the barrels appropriately. Mm-hmm. You can certainly over-oak a whiskey to a certain extent, which is why you need to be very careful and taste it out of the barrel along the way so that you know what you got. So we started off with 3-gallon barrels, which typically can age 120 to 150 days or thereabouts. And you can pull out a whiskey that's comparable to something that's aged 6 years.
All right. But now you have small barrels, but do you also age for maybe a few years down the road in more of the standard size barrels?
The idea with a startup distillery in any case is you want to get up to a larger barrel because larger barrels are more cost efficient for you. But you're not going to be able to get the product out to get the cash flow in order to get it going.
And you know about return on investment and cash flow and all this.
Yes, we do. And as much as we want to make a wonderful product and share it with everybody, you still need to actually make enough money to support the business and grow it.
Unless you go vodka and gin way.
Yes, and then, which is very simple because as soon as it comes out, and there it goes. This is one of the reasons why I think you don't see as many whiskey startups as you do vodka. Because
it's some time.
There's a lot of patience involved, and it takes a lot of time in order to get it up and running.
Right.
So the way we do it is we layer in larger barrels as we're running.
I see.
And slowly it grows.
Now, would you tell me a bit about that still?
Sure. It was it's originally an Armagnac still, and we got it out of Austria from Cuttino Distilling. These are some people that I've met through the industry, and they were very helpful. And in the beginning, because of the regulations in the industry and the difficulty in moving into a state that doesn't traditionally have a lot of distilleries, typically the municipalities don't quite understand the business and they think the distillery is going to blow up. So there's a lot of work that goes through just educating people about it. And that drove our choice in stills because we wanted to get an electric still to start with.
Okay.
So it's driven by basically heaters stuck into a water bath underneath it. Not traditionally, but a lot of guys, what they use is steam-driven stills, which is more efficient and it's hotter and you can drive it faster. But with an electric, you can get the same effect. It's like a double boiler, but you can kind of plug it in anywhere. You don't have to worry about building out all those systems. So it's a lot easier for the authorities and the municipalities to be comfortable with it.
All right.
And so that's what we did in order to kind of like break through and get this thing going. There's a tremendous amount of regulatory issues that one has to work through when doing this.
This is 100% corn.
Yes.
How do you go by that? So I guess there is no malted barley then. You just bring the enzymes, let them do their things, and you distill it twice. So it's a pot still. And would you tell us a little bit about your cutting of the heads and tails, or is that a secret?
Sure. No. The cutting of the heads and tails, the way that you can make a fine product is you kind of sacrifice output yield of what you're making to get higher quality. So you try to cut the heads at a point where you know you've already run through all the methyls and acetyls, which are the more volatile alcohols that come out first. They'll have a little bit of ethanol in there, but you just want to make sure that all those things are gone. So that's a process where the distiller has to sit at the still and taste it as it comes off the still and just know by experience when that's done. And when it tastes right to you, then you go ahead and you take that, remove it, and you cut to the hearts. And you collect all that until you get down to the tail, where you might have depending on who you are and how you distill, it gets to the point where you make a decision as to whether or not you're just kind of boiling water. Because once you get into the tail, it kind of almost, to me, it smells like dirty socks. You don't necessarily want that. But you do have a little bit of butyl alcohol. And those are some of the things that can give you, if you drink something that's maybe a little bit cheaper, it might give you a bigger headache in the morning. But something like this,
butanol,
something like this, typically you can enjoy it. You're not going to get any kind of harsh taste from any of the more volatile alcohols, and you're going to feel a little bit better in the morning.
All right.
But I don't know if the FDA will let me say that.
Well, I think we should be tasting it.
Absolutely.
And then, if you allow me, now this is bourbon. That's corn, but I know you have a successful rye.
That's true.
And you brought us some wheat. Will there be a more of a traditional bourbon recipe that would be more, say, 65% corn and maybe 25% rye and maybe some malted barley? What is the course that you're looking at now for the next products?
Well, we've got a couple of things working right now. Thank you. Cheers.
Cheers.
Some of the things that I would like to do is some of the more traditional, what in Virginia we call corn squeezins, which is where the farmer, when you would store corn up in the silos, they could put a pot down underneath, and as the gravity let these things sit down, it would squeeze out this very fine juice. They'd let it just collect, and it would ferment, and they would have a kind of very primitive whiskey that was developed just out in the field. Virginia is made for whiskey making in that it's, given the humidity and the temperature change, really need a warmer summer and a cooler winter. And what that does, it allows the whiskey to expand and contract in the barrel, move in and out of the wood. Now the charcoal layer inside the barrel actually acts a little bit like a filter. So as it moves in and out, that helps take out any extra harsh flavors that you don't want. And the color of the whiskey comes from the wood, which is one of the reasons why when you take our bourbon, you put it up next to a lot of other bottles, much darker. And the heat and the cold in Virginia just allows
that extra contact, extra.
And we also, with the humidity, it tends to keep a lot more of it in the barrel.
So then your storage doesn't go too high. You keep it sort of close to the ground. Do you?
When I can afford stands, I'll stack them all the way to the ceiling.
I've heard it costs about $2 million to have a proper Kentucky-style rick house.
Yes, but the key word there is Kentucky style.
Yeah, you want to go Virginian.
That's right.
Well, this is far from Virginia Lightning, I can tell you that. Would you fall for that trend of white whiskey and unaged whiskey, bourbons, and so on? Well, bourbon has to be aged, but
I wouldn't say that I would fall for it per se. I do enjoy green liquor, as we call it.
Since 2008, did you inspire some other people in Virginia?
Well, I get calls on a daily basis from people who are looking at the business or are interested in it. They're in grad school, or people that just want to come and work for free because they're just fascinated by what it is that we do. I think right now, the way I liken this industry is very close to where the craft brewery movement was in the 80s. Now, this is a lot more difficult to get into because of the regulatory environment. However, it's still small enough and growing, and there's a lot of people making really, really good things around the country that everybody can still be friends and work together. So we constantly talk to other distilleries and work with them and tweak things and share information. So it's a great industry to be in.
Very good. Well, hopefully wherever you are, you'll be able to enjoy this. Otherwise, soon enough in New York, definitely in Virginia.
Yes.
Cheers, Dave. Thanks a lot.
Cheers.